15th March, 1943. A resistance safe house in occupied Lyon. The Gestapo officer climbs the narrow staircase, his boots echoing against worn wooden steps. In the dim room above, a man waits, hands steady, breathing controlled. The officer reaches the landing. The door opens. There's a sound, soft, no louder than a book dropping onto carpet, and the officer crumples. Before his body settles, the shooter is already moving towards the window, the strange tubular device in his hand still warm, utterly unremarkable to anyone glancing up from the street below. It looks like a bicycle pump, it sounds like nothing at all, and it has just changed the mathematics of occupied Europe. This is the Welrod, and it represents one of the most ingenious solutions to an impossible problem ever devised by British military intelligence. Between 1942 and 1945, this weapon killed with a whisper. It eliminated sentries, assassinated collaborators, and terrorized the occupation forces of Nazi Germany, not through overwhelming firepower, but through absolute, chilling silence. The Germans knew these killings were happening. They found the bodies. They conducted investigations. But they rarely heard the shot, almost never caught the shooter, and for much of the war, they didn't even know what weapon was being used against them. The Welrod didn't announce British defiance. It simply erased the enemy, one silent discharge at a time, leaving only corpses and questions. What makes this weapon remarkable isn't its lethality. Plenty of weapons kill efficiently, but its acoustic engineering. This was a pistol that produced roughly 73 decibels when fired, comparable to a hand clap or a door closing. For context, a standard pistol generates approximately 160 decibels, louder than a jet engine at takeoff. The Welrod reduced gunfire to a mundane sound, something that wouldn't alarm a guard 20 meters away, wouldn't wake sleepers in adjacent rooms, wouldn't echo through occupied streets calling forth retribution. It transformed assassination from a dramatic announced act into something disturbingly subtle. And it did this with 1940s technology, with wartime manufacturing constraints, with materials that couldn't betray Britain's involvement if captured. This wasn't just clever. This was revolutionary. By 1941, Britain faced a peculiar tactical nightmare. Special Operations Executive, tasked with setting Europe ablaze through sabotage and resistance support, needed weapons for close-quarters elimination work. Agents, resistance fighters, and commandos required something for sentry removal, targeted assassination, and silent infiltration. But every existing solution failed catastrophically in at least one crucial dimension. Standard suppressed weapons of the era were inadequate. The Germans had experimented with suppressors, but these typically reduced report to around 120 to 130 decibels, still unmistakably gunfire, merely quieter gunfire. American suppressor designs faced similar limitations. Even with sound reduction, the mechanical noise of action cycling, the supersonic crack of bullets breaking the sound barrier, and the general acoustic signature remained problematic. You might reduce attention at distance, but anyone nearby would absolutely know a weapon had been discharged. Unsuppressed weapons were obviously unsuitable. A standard service pistol's report would wake an entire building, alert every guard within several hundred meters, and trigger immediate response. Resistance operations required discretion. A single guard needed removal without compromise. A collaborator required elimination without revealing method or perpetrator. Traditional firearms announced their use spectacularly. Knives and garrots were silent, certainly, but they demanded close contact, physical struggle, training in specific techniques, and considerable nerve. They were unreliable. A struggle could raise alarm. A miss meant hand-to-hand combat. They required the operative to be within arm's reach, to maintain control throughout, to risk blood evidence. Many resistance fighters lacked the training or physical capacity for reliable knife work. The psychological burden was immense. The numbers tell the story, starkly. British intelligence estimated that in 1941, roughly 60% of covert elimination attempts in occupied territory either failed or compromised the operative due to weapon limitations. Resistance cells were being rolled up because gunshots brought reinforcements before escape was possible. Agents were captured because suppressed weapons weren't actually silent. The mathematics were brutal. Britain needed to eliminate specific targets without alerting anyone that an elimination had occurred. Existing technology couldn't deliver that. The solution emerged from Station 9, the secret SOE development facility at Welwyn, Hertfordshire. Here, a small team of engineers and gunsmiths worked on what they termed special devices for irregular warfare. The design team was led by Major Hugh Reeves, working alongside engineers from the Birmingham Small Arms Company. Their brief was straightforward, yet seemingly impossible: create a genuinely silent pistol suitable for clandestine operations. The Welrod, designated the Welrod Mark I, represented a complete reconceptualization of suppressed firearms. Rather than adding a suppressor to an existing pistol, the entire weapon was designed around achieving maximum sound reduction. The result looked peculiar. A straight tube, roughly 310 millimeters long, resembling an oversized bicycle pump more than a conventional weapon. This appearance was deliberate. Disguise mattered. Captured with a Welrod, an agent might plausibly claim it was innocuous equipment. The weapon could be disassembled into components that individually aroused no suspicion. The suppression mechanism was ingenious. The barrel was encased within a series of baffles, metal discs with precisely calculated apertures that allowed the bullet to pass whilst trapping and diffusing propellant gases. These weren't simple obstacles. Each baffle was positioned and sized through extensive acoustic testing to maximize gas expansion and cooling whilst minimizing turbulence that might create noise. The suppressor extended nearly the weapon's entire length, giving maximum volume for gas expansion. Crucially, the Welrod was bolt action. This eliminated all mechanical noise from reciprocating parts. There was no slide racking backwards, no action cycling loudly. The shooter manually operated the bolt between shots, making the weapon inherently quiet mechanically. This also meant no ejected cartridge cases. Evidence remained contained within the weapon until manually removed. For clandestine work, this mattered enormously. No brass casings left behind meant no forensic trail. The weapon chambered .32 ACP, a relatively low-powered cartridge. This wasn't compromise. This was calculation. Low-powered ammunition meant subsonic velocities. The bullet never broke the sound barrier, eliminating the supersonic crack that betrays suppressed weapons using standard ammunition. The .32 ACP round traveled at approximately 305 meters per second from the Welrod, safely subsonic yet sufficient for lethal effect at close range. Manufacturing occurred at several locations, primarily at BSA facilities in Birmingham, with final assembly at Welwyn. Production numbers remain partially classified, but estimates suggest between 2,800 and 14,000 units were manufactured during the war years. The variation in estimates reflects wartime record-keeping and ongoing classification. Later variants appeared: the Mk2 with modified grip, the Mk2A with refinements. Each weighed approximately 1.1 kilograms loaded, surprisingly heavy given the size, but manageable for concealment. The weapon entered operational service in 1943, distributed primarily through SOE networks across occupied Europe. Resistance cells in France received them. Danish resistance groups employed them extensively. They appeared in Yugoslavia with partisan forces, in Norway with resistance networks, across the Low Countries with underground organizations. Documented uses remain sparse. Successful covert operations don't generate extensive public records, but fragments survive. Danish resistance records mention Welrods used in eliminations of German officers in Copenhagen during 1944. French Maquis groups reported using them for sentry removal during sabotage operations. One account from a resistance operative describes eliminating a Gestapo informer in a crowded cafe. Other patrons apparently didn't register the sound as gunfire. The target simply slumped forwards, appearing to have fainted or suffered a medical episode, giving the operative time to depart before anyone realized what had occurred. The psychological impact on German occupation forces was considerable. Sentries were found dead with no witnesses, no sounds reported. Collaborators died in their homes, offices, public spaces, with nothing heard. The silence was itself a weapon. It suggested British intelligence could reach anyone, anywhere, without warning or noise. Guards couldn't be reassured by patrols passing. Collaborators couldn't feel safe in crowds. The absence of sound made the threat seem omnipresent and ghostly. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans attempted comparable designs, but never achieved similar acoustic performance. Their suppressor experiments typically reduced weapon report to approximately 120 decibels, certainly quieter, but unmistakably gunfire at close range. German designs also tended towards adding suppressors to existing weapon platforms, rather than integrating suppression into fundamental design, limiting effectiveness. American OSS personnel received Welrods and used them operationally, but American suppressor development followed different trajectories, generally favoring attachable suppressors for existing weapon systems. The high-standard HDM, an American suppressed pistol, appeared later in the war and achieved roughly similar sound reduction, but remained less extensively distributed for covert operations. The Welrod's superiority lay in integrated design philosophy. By building the entire weapon around suppression rather than adapting existing designs, British engineers achieved acoustic performance unmatched by contemporary efforts. The bolt-action mechanism, often seen as primitive compared to semi-automatic designs, actually contributed to silence by eliminating mechanical cycling noise. This was elegant problem-solving, accepting manual operation to achieve something more valuable. Post-war, the design influenced numerous suppressed weapon programs. The Soviet MSP Groza pistol borrowed conceptual elements. The Walther P-38K with integrated suppressor reflected similar design thinking. Modern suppressed pistol designs still employ baffle arrangements descended from Welrod principles. The weapon demonstrated that with careful engineering, firearms could be made genuinely quiet rather than merely quieter. The actual historical impact remains difficult to quantify precisely. How many operations succeeded because a Welrod made no sound? How many agents survived because guards never heard shots? The nature of covert operations means success often leaves minimal record. Successful eliminations were frequently disguised as accidents, heart attacks, or other natural causes. The weapon's very effectiveness obscures its operational history. What's documented is this. German forces in occupied territories became increasingly paranoid about silent assassinations. Security protocols changed, guard rotations increased. Collaborators demanded additional protection. This imposed costs. Manpower diverted to security, resources allocated to protection, morale degraded by unpredictable threats. Whether the Welrod killed dozens or hundreds matters less than that the possibility of silent elimination required German response. Psychologically, the impact was profound. Soldiers and collaborators faced threats they couldn't hear approaching. Traditional defensive measures, listening for approaching danger, responding to gunfire, became unreliable. The weapon undermined one of humanity's most basic security instincts, the ability to hear threats. This generated anxiety disproportionate to actual casualties. The weapon also demonstrated British technical innovation in irregular warfare. Germany had superior conventional forces in 1940 to 1941, but Britain proved capable of developing highly specialized tools for asymmetric conflict. The Welrod represented technical sophistication applied to unconventional problems. It showed resistance groups that Britain was actively developing specific tools for their needs, boosting morale and cooperation. Surviving Welrods exist in various military museums. The Imperial War Museum holds examples. The Royal Armoury's collection includes several variants. These surviving specimens allow modern acoustic testing. Researchers have confirmed the original performance claims. A properly maintained Welrod genuinely does produce approximately 73 decibels, indistinguishable from ambient urban noise at even modest distances. Interestingly, the design remained classified long after the war. British forces continued using Welrod variants through the Malayan Emergency, Korean War, and beyond. Modified versions appeared in various post-war conflicts, suggesting the weapon retained operational value decades after its initial deployment. Only in recent decades has significant information been declassified, allowing fuller understanding of its development and use. 15th of March, 1943. The room in Lyon. The Gestapo officer lies on the floor. The shooter has already disassembled the weapon, tucked components into separate pockets, and joined the crowds in the street below. Hours later, German investigators arrive. They find the body, the wound, but no witnesses reporting gunfire. No shell casings, no clear forensic trail. Just another dead officer in occupied France, killed by a ghost. This was the Welrod's genius. Not simply that it killed, but that it killed without announcement, without spectacle, without the acoustic signature that makes violence unmistakable. It took the most violent act, taking human life, and rendered it acoustically mundane. A hand clap, a book dropped, a door closing. Sounds that fade immediately, that don't register as threats, that disappear into the ambient noise of daily life. In an occupied city, sound meant everything. A gunshot brought soldiers running, lockdowns imposed, reprisals enacted. Silence meant escape, meant continuation, meant tomorrow's operation could still occur. The Welrod delivered silence. Not the fragile quiet of careful movement, but the absolute acoustic absence that comes from engineering precision. 73 decibels. The sound of nothing alarming at all. Britain needed to kill quietly, and British engineers delivered a weapon that whispered. In the grand narrative of the Second World War, dominated by bombers, tanks, and naval fleets, a peculiar tube that killed with barely a sound seems modest. But to the agent in Lyon, the resistance fighter in Copenhagen, the commando removing a sentry in darkness, this whisper was everything. It was survival. It was mission success. It was getting out alive. The Welrod didn't announce British defiance with thunder. It eliminated enemies with silence, and that silence spoke volumes.